Hello, everyone. Welcome to our joint meeting with the 5th District. So happy to have you here. We will be kicking off in just a minute or two. We want to let people join in and get settled, make sure that their settings are correct. But we really appreciate you spending some of your evening with us on this important issue. And for a bit of housekeeping, just want to make sure everyone understands we are recording this presentation. The benefit of that is that you can go back and rewatch it or share it with friends, neighbors, and then those who are not able to attend tonight will be able to watch it at their convenience.
You hear Charlotte in the background.
Yes, we have some young preservationists joining our meeting. It's terrific. I started at a young age myself. My dad was a historian. So never too early.
Never too early. She's all into it.
I love it. Well, I think, we've got some folks in here now. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Jordan. I represent the 2nd District on City Council, and I'm joined by my colleague, Stephanie Lynch, who will introduce herself. We both are a little bit double booked thanks to RPS this evening. So you are in the very capable hands of our liaisons, Sven Phillipson and A.B. Robbins, as well as our city staff who will lead this discussion. And the goal is really to make sure we provide ample time at the end for conversation, questions, and this is the beginning of many more. So with that, Councilmember Lynch, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
No, just I'm really excited the city is embarking on this process. We have, I think, tried to take a bite of this apple for many decades, and I feel renewed in our approach, and certainly getting citizen feedback is the beginning and not the end of this process. I think we have a lot of very cool policy changes that could come out of this. Not the least of which are some of our preservation efforts on our historic buildings, but then also celebrating some figures and some parts of Richmond's history that traditionally have not been elevated and uplifted. So I think it's just a really exciting time in Richmond. We're kind of getting to rewrite, not rewrite history, but take a different look at how we tell our story, and this is really important work to help us kind of get started on that. So thanks everybody for participating, be a part of that process.
100%. Okay, with that, I think we will turn it over. Sven, would you like to guide us with a little table setting on the agenda and introduce our presenters?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilor Jordan. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this evening. We are joined by Kimberly Chen with the city's planning department, as well as Paige Pollard, the principal with Commonwealth Preservation Group, who have been helping to lead up this CRMP process. Thank you both so much for your time this evening. And I will turn it over to you all and stop sharing my screen, which has the agenda. I think everyone is situated and acquainted with that. So again, thanks everybody for joining.
Great. Thank you so much. And very excited to be here tonight. I like to point out that about 85% of the city of Richmond is over 50 years old, which means we are an extremely historic city. And we have never had, in the history of the city of Richmond, we have never had a plan to help us guide how we plan for historic resources, how we think about historic resources, how we even define historic resources. And it's so important to us that this is a community-driven process, and we are working on this process in conjunction with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources and Historic Richmond Foundation. And we have been so fortunate to have contracted with Commonwealth Preservation Group as our consultants to help guide us through this process, which is a 2-year process. We're already about 11 months in. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paige Pollard with Commonwealth Preservation Group.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to confirm that my screen is showing. Wonderful. And I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight to talk about this project. It's really been an exciting one for our office, and we've appreciated how welcoming and candid the community has been as we have begun our work. A little bit about Commonwealth Preservation Group. We are about to enter our 20th year, which is amazing to me. We are a small micro woman and minority owned business, and we offer a full array of historic preservation consulting services, ranging from oral history interviews to documentation of extant and no longer standing resources. We work with developers. We also work with cities and county governments. And we try and really make sure that we're nimble and responsive to the needs of communities and stakeholders. We're located in Norfolk, Virginia, so I'm about 2 hours from you all tonight, and love the wonders of modern technology that make these kinds of meetings happen. And we work on projects really throughout the Southeast, primarily in the Mid-Atlantic region. The team that is working on this project for the city of Richmond involves 4 key staff people and then a bunch of support staff from our office. I've been involved and met several of you all. I saw a bunch of familiar faces joining the meeting that have been involved in stakeholder engagement and interviews throughout the process. Kayla Hallberg is the project manager, and many of you have also met her during our engagement, and she has also facilitated several public meetings. We take a hard look at the feedback that we get from stakeholders, and we conduct pretty robust analysis of that data. That's all handled by Ashlyn Stump in our office. And then Ashley King is community engagement staff and handles project administration for us. So I want to start by talking about the project goals. We have heard so much about the success and the level of investment in the Richmond 300 plan. And we understand very clearly that the creation of a citywide cultural resource management plan was one of the key early steps in implementation of the Richmond 300 plan. So we realized that there is a lot of interest and just sort of many eyes on this project as it is kind of a stepping off point for implementation of Richmond 300. And throughout the project, from the early days, it's been a city priority as well as a community priority and our priority that this project is based on focus of equity and inclusion. Our goal is to provide the city with a plan that includes practical strategies and achievable goals that align with the vision of the community and the stakeholders in particular. We also want to make sure that because there are so many new people who are coming to Richmond these days, that the plan includes a brief history of the community and also talks about the threats to resources and strategies for risk management, as well as a framework for prioritizing city funding that might be dedicated to cultural resources stewardship. All professions have their jargon, and we are not exempt from that. And so I wanted to make sure that as we talk through the presentation tonight and as we engage with you all in responding to our questions, as well as you see iterations of this plan presented within the community and even draft documents, that everyone has a good fundamental understanding of a few key terms. I put those terms up on the screen so that everyone can take a look. I'm not going to bore you by reading the slide, but just know that for us, the word preservation has a very specific meaning, and it relates to stewardship of resources. And cultural resources is a very broad term that refers to any type of asset that is historic and is of value to the community. When we use the term historic, we're typically referring to something that is recognized in the National Register program as a building, object, district, or site, and typically the rule of thumb is that would be more than 50 years old. A survey in our world is a process either very reconnaissance level or a detailed, in-depth analysis of resources that are located within a historic area or that are historic individually of their own right. We use the word stakeholders a lot. To us, that is an inclusive word. That means anyone who feels that they have an interest in the project or in a particular neighborhood or area that we're discussing. And we use the word internal stakeholder in preservation plan development to talk about those folks who directly touch city policy. And then external stakeholders are all of the other individuals and organizations that aren't directly tied to the city, but that have an interest in the outcome of the plan. So, getting into more detail, we've had a lot of conversations about the name of this document, and we really have sort of challenged ourselves with terminology. We are using the phrase cultural resources management plan because we want to be as inclusive as possible, but we recognize that it's important to translate to the community what is a cultural resource. In our world and in our estimation, a cultural resource can either be a physical, tangible thing that you can touch. That might be a building, might be a statue, might be an artistic statement. It might be, a fragment of something that existed in the past. Neighborhoods are another example of a cultural resource, as well as landscapes, parks, view sheds, and archaeological sites and cemeteries. Intangible cultural resources are those things that are a little bit more ephemeral, like community in the sense that that brings up, like demolished or no longer extant resources, like oral histories that we hear either from our grandparents or through interviewing older members of the community who might be able to tell a story that we can't physically see anymore. And then the concept of community, history, character, and identity is another example of an intangible cultural resource. So as we take all of those very sort of dense definitions and then begin to put this into an outline for how we approach a management plan for cultural resources in such a vibrant city, we like to begin with a preliminary outline that helps us organize our thinking and make sure that we don't miss any key ideas. This is a very early draft of what we think the chapters might look like in the eventual cultural resource management plan. These are not set in stone. They will change both the content and the title. The word choice will change all the way through our stakeholder engagement process so that we can ensure that we're responsive to what we hear from the community. The first chapter is just a general introduction about what a plan is, why we're doing this, who the stakeholders were, and how we approached it. This is also likely where we would put the light history. The second chapter gives a little bit of context and background for preservation planning in Richmond and how that has evolved over time, what we think the future looks like. We would probably include some information about enabling legislation and some constraints and opportunities for the preservation planning function within the city of Richmond. Chapter 3 is where we really begin to get into the meat of the document. And this is where we try to take all of the valuable stakeholder input that we've received, as well as all of the research and learning that we've done about current policies and process and related activities that the city is engaging in. And we try to formulate some guiding principles that respond to the community's vision and help us kind of organize the goals and objectives that we will put forth in the plan. And that leads us directly to chapter 4, where we identify key goals, which are kind of in the hierarchy. They're the highest level of highest category of sort of strategies. And then under each goal, we identify specific actions that can be taken to achieve the goals that we've identified as priorities. And that chapter will also include a guide for implementation. In chapter 5, we get into survey and risk planning, which is really about managing risk for potential flood risk or other natural disasters, or even man-made disasters, and also identifying survey priorities to document significant resources throughout the community. In chapter 6 and chapter 7, we really get into roles. It's very typical to have a chapter on kind of what the internal stakeholders' roles are. That, again, would be the city, the folks who are directly connected to the city. But in our stakeholder engagement, we're hearing a lot of ideas and priorities that might fall outside of the capacity or even the legal ability of the city to implement. And so we wanted to be very clear in our plan about what are those activities that are necessary to make the plan successful that fall to internal responsibility within the city. And then what are those activities that might be better suited or might have to be undertaken by external stakeholders. We think that that has merit because it really defines the role. It gives everyone an opportunity to participate, and it also will likely allow us to identify some specific areas where collaboration between internal and external stakeholders is important. We think all of this work is going to need to be done in partnership across departments as well as across organizations and communities. So I've given you a lot of information in the last couple of minutes, and I think it's important to try and break this project down and give you a little bit of detail and background about how we've gotten to where we are tonight. The first phase of this project was originally conceived to include research into existing processes, how the city's preservation program functions, identification of areas that were at high risk to be addressed in the preservation plan, and then also some very targeted stakeholder engagement and analysis. There was also a vision of a limited number of community-wide public engagement events. And then it was envisioned that we would begin preparing some draft sections of the plan based on the activities I just listed. So when we started work and began to get input from internal stakeholders, the first step was to meet with the project proponents, the key partners in the project, which included the City of Richmond and the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. And we also included Historic Richmond Foundation in several of our meetings. The input that we received from internal stakeholders really told us that we didn't have enough feedback from the community, and that there was a much broader array of interested parties who we needed to talk to in order to get the full picture of priorities for our plan. So that original stakeholder engagement path included 3 days of interviews. We envisioned talking to a total of 9 to 15 people. During those interviews, we actually ended up doing having at least 20 distinct conversations, and we realized that even that wasn't enough. So we approached our project partners and recommended that we revise the phase 1 scope of work and deliverables so that we could spend adequate time engaging with stakeholders, and so that we could have a larger set of interviews to get input from a broader range of folks. And we were very pleased that the project partners immediately agreed. And so we revised our deliverables and kind of the phase 1 project design, which enabled us to conduct an additional 28 interviews for a total of 48. And that's 3 times what we had initially intended. So our updated phase 1 deliverables included the additional stakeholder engagement, as well as analyzing the existing programs and existing documents and policies. And then what we did was we prepared an executive summary of the work to date and a preliminary outline for the preservation plan. We also prepared some stakeholder input summary and analysis, and we prepared recommendations for phase 2, including community engagement strategies that came out of our conversations with stakeholders in phase 1, as well as an updated schedule and a recommendation that we expand the advisory committee to include members of the community who are not necessarily preservation professionals, but who had evinced significant interest. In our stakeholder engagement, I've got a little chart here that you can see that we asked similar questions across all stakeholder interviews, and we received very compelling feedback about that need for community engagement, about prioritization of the physical environment, and about mitigating the growth, density, and development pressures using historic preservation as a tool. Also very, very high on everyone's mind was the idea of ensuring that this preservation plan addressed historic resources of all types, recognizing all communities' history. And so this is just one example of the stakeholder engagement work kind of really pointing us in the direction we needed to go for plan development. So one of the key questions that we asked our stakeholders was about threats to cultural and historic assets in the community. And we asked this question of both internal stakeholders, the city staff and leadership, as well as external stakeholders such as community leaders, staff, and board members of nonprofit organizations and organizations working in the community, and then individuals who are recommended by past interviewees. And even though the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders have very different perspectives about the city of Richmond, you can see in these pie charts that the themes that came out of those conversations with both subsets were very similar. You know, a high level of focus on the impact of development to the community. There, you know, was a focus on sort of affordable housing, gentrification, displacement. There's, you know, concern about advocacy, which reflected in the external stakeholders' concerns about demolition and zoning. Just a lot of parallels where the words might be different, but the concepts were very similar across both groups. And to give you a sense of who we reached out to, I just wanted to share a slide recognizing many of the organizations whose staff and boards and membership donated time and energy to these interviews. And this is just a snapshot, but I think it does show you the broad range of participation we had in this conversation. So we took all of the questions that we asked of the stakeholder groups and tried to kind of organize them to see if we could identify key themes that emerged. And in the chart on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see a bold set of phrases: community engagement, cultural landscape and built environment, density and development pressures, inclusivity and equity, and city staffing and resources. Those bold categories were the themes that came out of the round 1 internal stakeholder interview. So those 5 ideas were what we heard most often. When we got to the round 2 external stakeholder interviews with the community groups and community members, Again, as I said before, a lot of the words were different, but the themes were very similar. So the information you see on the right side, non-bolded in this chart, is what we heard from those round 2 stakeholders, and it's organized under the headings that we heard from round 1. So you can really see how this data begins to help us sort through and identify where we need to focus in development of the cultural resources management plan. So our key takeaways from this analysis were that the focus in Richmond within the community is not just on the physical building, but also those really important intangible resources, such as culture, such as community character, such as feeling and association with a significant neighborhood or with the identity of the city of Richmond as it is. There was a lot of conversation about changes resulting from new development that might change the way that Richmond feels in terms of its distinct character as a city. There was a significant emphasis on the need to ensure that there was equity and inclusion throughout not only the plan, but also implementation, both in the sense of what resources are recognized, protected, stewarded, celebrated, but also in who is participating and how that implementation occurs. Development pressure by far was the greatest perceived threat to historic resources across both sides, both the internal and external stakeholders. And so with that, there was a lot of discussion about the old and historic districts, or is there another way that we can recognize and protect neighborhood character that might not be as restrictive in certain areas. And there's a real sense that there needs to be some way to implement protections for community character that don't result in cost prohibitive regulation. And then it became very clear that there is a complex relationship, at least in the minds of many community members, about housing affordability, growth, density, and historic preservation. And in some cases, members of the community feel very strongly that those needs and ideas can support one another. And in some parts of the community, or from some stakeholders, it was very clear that the perception is that those are ideas that are in conflict. So that's obviously something we really need to address. Okay, so that was the outcome of our phase 1 work. We've just concluded that at the end of the summer, and we've started phase 2, which was designed to be a really strong community engagement process that will take our current draft outline and draft chapter summary and move that into content development. So using the input that we received to prepare our deliverables for phase 1, we created a menu of options for engagement activities. Because this is an outgrowth of Richmond 300 with a much shorter schedule and a much leaner budget, we wanted to come up with ideas that would be efficient from a cost and time perspective, and also allow for a broad range of input and participation. We also wanted to make sure that we listened to a lot of feedback about the engagement that occurred with Richmond 300, some of it being very positive feedback and some being somewhat negative, or just feeling like there were some things that could have been done to serve a broader array of the community, for example, older members of the community. And so we tried to really listen to that and make sure that our recommendations responded to those comments as well. So that brings us to where we are tonight. We are having one of our public engagement meetings. We have recorded this so that it can also go on the website, so that it can be viewed by members of the community who can come tonight. We've distributed a survey. It is available online and in hard copy format. And I should have updated this slide. It will actually run through November 20th. so that folks at this meeting hopefully will be able to distribute the survey link to members of their community, family, other neighborhoods. And then in addition to the 2 public meetings, virtual and hybrid, we are planning a youth engagement activity and then an open house in early 2024. So at this point, we really want to start hearing from you all. I would love it if folks would either answer in the chat or raise your hand and we'll try and unmute you to answer a series of questions. So first question we're going to ask this group is, what cultural or historic assets exist in your community? Please, if you could enter 1 or 2 thoughts into the chat box or use the raise your hand feature, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
And Paige, just as a quick FYI, because we are far enough into the meeting and confident enough that we are not joined by any Zoom bombers at this point, folks will also be able to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to just go ahead and do that as well, you can do that.
We have 2 comments in the chat from Susan that architecture is essential, from William, cemeteries, Julia, historic architecture, historic events, unique culture. From Ellen, are you looking for types of resources or specific places? You want to respond to that one, Paige?
I think we are looking for specific, it wouldn't have to be a place. We use the word asset very much intentionally, but we want specific ideas. And the goal is to make sure that citywide, we know about those things that might not already register on the radar screen as cultural or historic assets.
We also, from Richmond Regional Tourism, Jackson Ward, Capitol, Maggie Walker House, so much. Martha, Historic Neighborhoods, Emily, Downtown Broad Street, Kathleen, Historic Housing Structures, Single Family Duplexes, Quads, multiple cemeteries, Emily, Artist Community, and a thank yous from Sven.
That is fantastic. I love the broad range of ideas that you guys shared, because it really does demonstrate that there are so many different types of resources or assets that make the city of Richmond special, and we need to ensure that this plan attempts to address all of them, or create a place so that in the future, as new things become priorities, that they can be adequately addressed as well. I'm going to move on to the next question, if we're ready for that.
We've got a few more. Let me
Great.
just do these really quick. Richmond's role in shaping the nation in every century. Shockoe Hill African Burial Ground. I live outside the city, but have direct ties to Shockoe Hill African Burial Ground. Duplexes, multiplexes, the James River Bird Park, Oregon Hill, parks. An immense amount of the ruins of the James River Park system. Richmond is gifted with many neighborhood pockets throughout our city: James River, the Pump House, green space, archaeological sites and collections, Oregon Hill on the National Register of Historic Places. Yet we have to fight demolition by development. We tried to become a city historic district, but got no help from the city, completely ignored. Neighborhood fabric possibly threatened by amphitheater. Historic neighborhoods now and in the past, North Side, the Spotswood Robinson House. Cemetery neighborhood is mostly intact 19th century working class neighborhood with distinctive architecture. On the National Historic Register, it is threatened by development. Historic remnants of the canal, landmark district culture, another one for Oregon Hill. So with that, why don't we move on to the next question?
That was a super collection of answers, and I'm thrilled with that, and I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to say next. What are 1 to 2 issues in your community or citywide that have an impact on historical cultural resources? This might be something like development, or changing like new residents, or it could be anything that's an issue that you think is changing the landscape in terms of historic assets. How are our responses looking, Kim?
They're coming in fast and furious. The cost to maintain historic housing, displacement, uncontrolled development, and potential demolition, lack of financial resources, private development that doesn't have Section 106 requirements, development zoning, YIMBYs, I guess, yes, in my backyard, infrastructure projects, railroad, highway expansion, etc. That meant to be NIMBYs instead of YIMBYs. Thank you for that correction, Samantha. Lack of comprehensive transit plan, erosion, no impact on demolition of historic properties or places, zoning changes that do not honor character of neighborhoods, zoning that allows building heights to loom over historic 2- and 3-story homes. In Oregon Hill, land is less expensive than some areas, so our new zoning rule proposal encourages demolition to build taller buildings that replace historic structures. Housing affordability across the board, ownership, tax rates, utility rates, maintenance costs. Need for inventive ways to preserve descendant and resident stories, memories, inadequate infrastructure, density push without parking requirements, and limited public transportation, risk of historic building demolition versus repurposing, need to invest in small businesses already in historic buildings. Sometimes the economic development incentives go to big projects with no pressure from VCU to create more student housing, which does not create more affordable housing, lack of protections for historic structures, not enough city staff focused on ways to promote historic preservation. Sorry, that was unclear. Big projects with big impacts. Lack of effective community engagement. Need to truly recognize the smaller organizations doing this work. Need financial incentives to preserve rather than tear down. It seems Richmond 300 path runs counter to plan being considered here. Response to that is that this document will become an amendment to Richmond 300, so it will be folded into Richmond 300, and its recommendations will be weighed at the same level as recommendations from Richmond 300. So this will be a supplement too.
Well, that was an incredibly broad array of answers. I am not sure I heard the same answer twice, and so that tells us how, what a big job this is and how important it is. But I also want to thank you all for including suggestions for us in terms of how to tackle some of these issues. And I want to note that we are also looking nationwide at best practices. In fact, Kayla and I participated in a Zoom call with a consultant who's in Florida, who's dealing with very similar issues in a couple of municipalities in Florida, and we've agreed, we are trading ideas back and forth, recognizing different states have different enabling legislation, but many of our communities are facing the same challenges. And I think, the list that you all just provided is incredible and reflects many of the same issues that other communities are facing, but certainly some that are unique to Richmond.
If I could add one more thing, there are several about zoning. And for those who are not aware, the city is beginning a process sort of in tandem with this of revising, re-envisioning the city's zoning ordinance. That is unfortunately a long process, but we are getting ready to start that. And one of the first steps that we're taking in that process is working on a analysis of neighborhood character to help us guide what that future zoning might look like. And then last comment is that we have no archaeological ordinance or clarity about when sites get protected.
Those are all, great things that we need to have on our radar as we're beginning to move into developing the goals and action for this plan and the implementation strategies. So thank you. I have one more question for the group.
Paige,
And
if I may ask a quick question that Cindy asked in the chat before we move on to the third question, and this may be directed to Kim. Did anyone from Richmond attend, and I assume this is Richmond City, Cindy, but correct me if I'm wrong, attend the recent National Trust's National Conference?
And as you were reading that, I was typing the response, and yes, one of our staff members did.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you.
And I would say we also sent someone from CPG, so learned a lot of things about what other communities are doing on some of these topics there. The last question I have for the group feels like a big question. The question is, what is at risk? When we ask that question, what we mean is, what would be disastrous if it were not addressed in this plan? What can we absolutely not miss in terms of content development? And that might be a class of resources. It might be a particular site. It might be a preservation concept that isn't adequately addressed at this point. We ask that question in a broad way because we really want to invite big thinking and big ideas. So I'm going to be quiet once you guys think.
I think you stumped people. It is a huge idea.
Now I know the second district is not that quiet.
Here we go.
Well, I'm going to give a couple of, I'll give one or two that we heard in our stakeholder engagement. One is Richmond's character. And the comment came out of discussion about the number of new people who are moving in and new developments that are occurring. And in the course of all of that good, positive growth, there was a concern that the sense of Richmond, its Richmondness, might get lost. So that's just one.
And that's reflected here. We've got one, the fabric of our community, millions of dollars in visitor spending. Recognize and support that for the most part, cultural resources in the context of this conversation means historic resources. And I think that it is critical, but I also hope that cultural resource at some point in this conversation can include art. The character of the city, further damage to neighborhoods, damaged by urban renewal, encroachment by VCU, and the highways that tear through the center of neighborhoods. Cemeteries and burial sites are rapidly decaying and descendants are aging. Displacement. Richmond's very specific and unique and important character. This is an incredibly unique community. Our architectural integrity that makes Richmond, Richmond. James River, wildlife under stress, we are losing species. Acknowledgement that history and character is a huge city asset that is a priority for our cultural and economic growth. Many oldies forget and new folks don't know. Big awareness building and education. Shaco Hill African Burial Ground is a threatened site. The city owns 1.2 acres of a 31-acre burial ground. The rest is divided between over a dozen owners. Billboards on recently registered historic sites, Shaco Hill Burial Ground, 5th and Hospital Street. Recognizing and creating action around resources that have been historically neglected, i.e. burial grounds, historically Black neighborhoods. Loss of historic resources. I think it will be a missed opportunity if the plan doesn't recognize that we need to research and examine and interpret the city's history, archaeology, oral history, more. So much historic memorialization over the years has been about ideology, or it's outdated. We need to not assume that we know the history already, because we are just seeing the top of the iceberg. Loss of identity. I've got two more. Need to recognize the play in, live, work, and play. The play in, live, work, and play. Attention to actions now that affect issues this seeks to address. Need some moratoriums.
Well, Sven, you were right. This is not a quiet group, and those were all really excellent ideas. I think some that echo what we've heard in other engagement, and some new ideas as well. So this is making me excited to think about how we tackle these issues. Were there any other folks that had any last minute thoughts? Amber, Sven?
I think that's it. We ended with a pair of clapping hands.
All right, I love it. So I am going to sort of talk you guys through just a little bit of a status update. As I mentioned, we have a survey that's live. It will close on the 20th, so a week from tonight. And wanted to put the QR code out there because we want to make sure that anyone who's participating tonight takes the time to go and complete the survey, and also issue a little challenge. The right side of this slide shows you by district the percentage of responses we've received from each of the districts. Now, districts 2 and 5 are our star performers, as you can see, with 27% of the responses and 15% respectively. But I'm sure you have family and friends who live in some of the other districts where the representation is a little bit lighter. And we really want to make sure that we have input from everyone, from every corner of the city, so that we can adequately address the priority of equity and inclusion. So if you all have friends, have family within your district or in other districts, please share the QR code. And I think Sven is going to drop the link that goes directly to the survey on the web, if that's a more convenient way for you all to share this information. And then I'm going to close out by just giving you all a preview of what's to come. So the project schedule from now until the end really has, as you can see in the purple highlighted areas, multiple touch points for community engagement. We will continue outreach both from the standpoint of engagement as well as the survey through the end of this year. We're also going to be taking applications for an advisory committee that will help make sure that we stay on track with plan development. And information about that is available from Kim. And then we are going to spend some time analyzing all of this good input that we've had. In the winter months, we will move into developing a summary of the public engagement results and advancing the outline of our plan to a higher level of detail. Once we have that outline ready, we are going to have an open house so that we can get early feedback from the community about how that's looking before we really move into content development. And we're also going to run that by the advisory committee, as well as present in a public meeting and to City Planning Commission. We're going to spend the spring really drafting content development for first draft review that will come in the summer. And we'll have another presentation and public meeting in the summertime to, again, get more input. Are we still on the right track? As the plan is formulated, is it really hitting the right areas in the way that the community envisions? And then we'll spend next fall finalizing that draft and making some final presentations, hopefully for a smooth adoption by council. You know, I always tell folks when we engage in a project like this or design guidelines or anything that's a public process, we know that we're not going to make everybody 100% happy, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everyone can get behind the plan and come together as a community and really actively and enthusiastically implement it, and that the successful outcome will be that it is a plan that is actually used as a tool actively by the community. So with that, we are always here for questions, either tonight in the chat box, or you can reach out to us directly. This is our website and email address and our office phone number. And I'm just going to stop talking now because I feel like I've been talking for a long time, and I turn it over to the good folks at the city.
And I'm thinking. I can't type and speak at the same time. I just posted my email in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, I had a question about the advisory committee. If you would like to text me after this meeting, I am happy to reply to you individually. So my address is in there, kimberly.chen@rva.gov.
There's one question about the districts and which districts represent which areas of the city. Would it be possible to maybe drop in a link to a district map from the city website?
Sure thing. I'll do that. And I think, Julie, your larger point is well taken too, that folks across the city don't have a great sense of what district they live in general, and don't think about their community, their neighborhood as being in a particular district or another. And that can be a challenge when we talk about, you know, citywide collaboration like this. But it's why we're so happy to be collaborating with the 5th District tonight. I just want to offer to folks, if they have any additional open questions at this point, please feel free to ask them. Again, you can unmute yourself at this point.
I will ask one quick question. It's just a process question. So this will go to the Planning Commission and then to council. Is that what happened? What's the process on this?
Yes, it will go to the Planning Commission that will pass a resolution that will go to City Council to adopt this plan as an amendment to Richmond 300. And that will be sometime December of next year or January of 25.
Great question. And then I think in the chat here from Valerie and Mike, some feedback on the online survey. Kim or Paige, are you able to comment on whether that survey, there's any ability to edit it at this point, or will there be later iterations of it?
It will be closing on the 20th. So we will not be amending it at this point, but there will be, and it's not very granular at this point because we're really just trying to get a sense of the feeling of the community and what the community finds to be important. There will be many opportunities, as Paige showed you on the slide, for public engagement. There will be many opportunities to get into the granular.
And I think also it's important to say that, you know, this plan is intended to carry the preservation program forward for the next 10 years. And so while we need granular input to make sure that we address adequately all the important ideas and priorities within the community, the plan itself will not have granular recommendations in many areas, because it's designed to be a framework or a tool to prioritize and, you know, kind of direct efforts in an organized, systematic way.
Thanks, Paige. That's helpful. I think that Councillor Jordan had to hop to get pulled in the RPS direction this evening. But I did just want to share on her behalf that our office is working with our 5th District colleagues and other colleagues on council in parallel to the CRMP process and hoping to be informed by the CRMP process on conversations around what some enhanced demolition review ordinances may look like. And in particular, right now, what I think is really timely and important for folks to keep in mind is that the city is finalizing our legislative priorities to bring to the General Assembly for the next session in January. And one thing that is expected to be part of that package is a request to enable Richmond to utilize the same authority that counties, and Kim, please jump in to correct me if I'm wrong here, across the Commonwealth are empowered to have, where they can actually fine property owners if they demolish a structure that is historic as defined without proper permitting, as we've seen in Richmond in the past couple of months, the assessed value of the entirety of the property. So it's a pretty significant sort of stick to prevent folks from doing that. Right now, we do not have that statutory authority, and so we are hoping to lobby the General Assembly and work with our Richmond legislative delegation to pursue that in the upcoming session.
That's correct. The city can't do anything that we're not permitted to do by the legislature. And one of the things that we discovered recently is that counties throughout Virginia can bring civil penalties against someone who demolishes a building without approval in a designated historic district or without a proper demolition permit. And that's a cities don't have that ability. And so it's very timely that we can now take that to the General Assembly this year.
Kim, it's Lenora.
Yes.
It comes to mind the issue with the billboard, where had it been in the county, there were certain things that you probably would have been able to do, but because it was the city, you couldn't. Will you go after the legislature for those kind of permissions as well?
Right now we are focused on demolitions. That's not to say that in another legislative session, and that the statute that you're referring to has to do with billboards being built within a certain distance of a cemetery.
Correct.
So Kim, I would hope that you will let community groups know how they can help you, neighborhood groups, as you're trying to work on that, your whole General Assembly package. I think you would find some willing support.
And yeah, I'm gonna let,
Well, I can just say for our part, Julie, on that I think that's something that council is looking to do sort of across our legislative priorities portfolio, and collaborate, across all 9 districts to be able to create opportunities for residents to engage in that legislative advocacy process.
Yeah.
So definitely look for more information coming from council on that.
Yeah, and I just echo, like, some of you have new representatives throughout the city. As you get to know them, make sure you just keep it on your list of things that you would like to see them advocate for you, for us in the city of Richmond.
If you see them in the grocery store, corner them. And Lenora, did that answer your question on that?
Thank you.
All right, folks, unless anybody has any other pressing questions at this time or comments that you'd like to share with the group, I think we will bid everyone adieu. I think hopefully folks have a good understanding of next steps and further opportunities to engage in the process as it moves forward. Again, just really want to thank Paige and Kim for their time tonight, and for the awesome turnout that we had at the meeting this evening. This meeting is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, and also will be on the CRMP webpage as well. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.